My parents handed my sister 100% of the company I had spent 11 years building, so I walked out before they could ask me to smile for the announcement photo. 7 days later, Dad found me in the rain outside the loading dock, pale and breathless. Emily, please, we just lost the $9 million client. Claire can't fix this. I looked at the factory lights. Then at the brass key he once called proof that he trusted me most. Let your CEO daughter handle it. He flinched. Then he said something that made me realize losing the company had never been their biggest secret. Before Claire came back, I thought the brass key meant something. Dad gave it to me the winter I turned 23. After a storm shut down half the city and one of our refrigerated trucks broke down outside the warehouse, I stayed all night with the production crew, calling suppliers, moving inventory, and making coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. By sunrise, every shipment was back on schedule. Dad pressed the key into my palm and said, "This place needs someone who doesn't run when things get hard." I carried that sentence for 11 years. I'm Emily Hayes. I was 34 when everything fell apart, though people usually guessed younger. I kept my dark hair tied low at work, wore plain button-down shirts, and moved through the factory fast enough that my heels barely touched the floor. I knew which machine rattled before it failed. I knew which driver was caring for a sick wife. I knew which supplier would bend a deadline and which one would charge us for breathing. Officially, I was director of operations. In reality, I was the reason the doors opened every morning. Our family business made packaged foods for regional grocery chains around Denver. Dad, Robert, had built it from 2 rented ovens and a delivery van that stalled whenever it snowed. Mom, Margaret, handled bills and payments in the early years, then stepped back once the company grew. Dad owned 70%. Mom owned 30%. And me, I owned a key. Claire, my older sister, owned nothing either. But Claire had always been different. She left home in her 20s, moved from city to city, and built a career around photography, branding, and making ordinary things look expensive. Every Thanksgiving, Mom saved the chair beside Dad for her. Even when we all knew she wasn't coming, I was the daughter who showed up. Claire was the daughter they waited for. Still, I never resented her. Not then. I believed work mattered. I believed loyalty mattered. I believed Dad saw what I was building, even when he never said it in front of anyone. That belief cost me 2 serious relationships, my best friend's wedding, and more holidays than I can count. But the $9 million retail deal made every sacrifice feel close to paying off. I had spent almost 2 years designing the supply plan, negotiating delivery windows, and proving we could handle the volume without cutting quality. The client trusted me because I never promised what we couldn't deliver. Then, one Monday in early spring, Dad texted me during a production meeting. "Claire's coming home. Dinner tonight. Important news." I looked down at the brass key beside my coffee. For the first time, it felt cold. I thought the news would be about my promotion. By dessert, I would learn they had been planning my replacement for months. Claire came through the front door carrying 1 cream suitcase and wearing a camel coat too expensive for Denver slush. Mom hugged her before she had both feet inside. Dad stood behind them with a smile I had not seen in years. At dinner, Claire talked about brand stories, customer emotion, and why our packaging looked stuck in another decade. Dad laughed. Actually laughed. When I mentioned a supplier delay affecting 3 stores, he waved one hand. "You'll handle it." That was always his answer for me. 3 days later, Claire was named Chief Brand Officer, I found out in the conference room, in front of 8 managers and a tray of grocery store muffins. Dad introduced her like she had rescued us. "Claire is going to lead us into the future." Then he turned to me. "Emily, help her understand operations." Claire smiled. "You've always been good at keeping the wheels turning." The words sounded harmless. They weren't. Over the next few months, she arrived after 9, left before 5, and spent long lunches discussing color palettes. Dad praised every mock-up she placed on the screen. Meanwhile, I caught a labeling mistake before 20,000 packages shipped. I renegotiated a supplier increase that saved us more than $1 million. I rebuilt a delivery schedule after a warehouse breakdown. Dad thanked me once near the vending machines. "Good work." Then he walked into Claire's presentation and applauded a new shade of green. The shift happened slowly enough that I kept doubting myself. Claire started sitting in Dad's office with the door closed. Meetings appeared on calendars I could not open. Reports I had accessed for years suddenly required approval. When I asked Mom, she folded a dish towel and said, "Your father is reorganizing." Then I noticed a large legal payment among the monthly bills. I asked Dad what it covered. Routine planning. He did not look up. That Friday, the company held its anniversary dinner. White lights hung between steel beams. Employees brought their spouses. Cinnamon cake sat beside framed photographs from the early years. I thought Dad was finally announcing my promotion. Instead, he stepped onto the stage and asked Claire to join him. The screen behind them changed. "Claire Hayes, owner and chief executive officer." For a second, I heard nothing. Then the room filled with applause and clinking glasses. Dad announced that he and Mom had transferred the entire company to Claire. 100%. Then he smiled at me. "Emily will continue leading operations." Of course, no one knows the business better. Everyone turned toward me, waiting for a smile. I gave them one. Sometimes humiliation hits so hard your body protects you before your mind catches up. After dinner, I checked the ownership records. Claire 100%, Dad 0, Mom 0, me 0. They had signed everything weeks earlier, while I was finishing the $9 million deal at home. I placed the papers on the dining table. If Claire owns everything, why am I still responsible for everything Dad called me emotional? Mom said I had always been strong. Claire said nothing needed to change. So I asked one final question. "Were you ever going to tell me before the deal was signed?" Mom gripped her napkin. Claire looked down. Dad stared at the wall. And in that silence, I finally heard the truth. The next morning, I arrived before sunrise. The factory was quiet except for the vent hum and a forklift beeping somewhere in the dark. I stood outside Dad's office with the brass key pressed into my palm until its ridges marked my skin. Then I set it on his desk. My resignation was one page. No accusations, no threats, no dramatic speech. I listed my final responsibilities, the projects I would transfer, and the date my access should end. I copied legal and human resources. I returned my laptop, badge, and company card. Dad read the first line and looked up. "You're overreacting." Claire leaned against the window, arms folded. "You can't walk away because you're upset." I looked at her. "You own 100%. You're the CEO. I'm giving you room to lead, for once." She had nothing polished to say. I spent the day documenting every open order, supplier issue, and delivery deadline. I answered every reasonable question. I did not delete a record. I did not warn employees to leave. I did not take one customer with me. At 5:30, I walked through the production floor one last time. Warm cinnamon and toasted oats hung in the air. People glanced up from the line. Confused, but I kept moving. Outside, the cold car seat pressed against my back. I cried before starting the engine, not because I regretted leaving, because part of me had spent 11 years believing that Key opened the future. The first day without me. Claire moved a major production run to match a marketing launch. The warehouse manager warned her there was not enough packaging. "Find a workaround," she said. By the third day, one supplier was waiting on a payment approval nobody knew how to authorize. Two supervisors had different delivery schedules. A grocery order left 6 hours late. My phone lit up with messages from former co-workers. I turned it face down. On the 5th day, Rebecca called. "Are you still leading our rollout, No?" I said. I resigned. The silence on her end changed the temperature of the room. "Did anyone notify us, No?" She asked whether I could still guarantee the production plan. I told her the truth. I can't guarantee anything I no longer control. I did not ask her to cancel. I did not criticize Claire. I simply stopped lending my name to promises I could not keep. The next morning, Rebecca scheduled an emergency review. Claire walked in carrying beautiful slides. The client asked for capacity numbers, backup suppliers, and delay costs. Claire had none. By Friday afternoon, the $9 million agreement was gone. 7 days after I left, Dad called, this time. He did not sound angry. He sounded afraid. Dad's name filled my screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Emily. His voice came out tight. We need you at the office. Not hello, not, I'm sorry, a command. What happened? You know what happened? Rebecca pulled the $9 million deal. Claire needs help fixing the rollout. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the brass key lying beside my coffee. Claire is the CEO. This isn't the time for sarcasm. I'm not being sarcastic. He lowered his voice. People could lose their jobs. That landed exactly where he meant it to, for years. He had used responsibility like a leash. If I said no, someone else would suffer. If I rested, a deadline would slip. If I asked for credit, I was making things about myself. Then Claire should take responsibility, I said. She doesn't understand the operation the way you do. There it was, the truth he had refused to say until it cost him $9 million. Please, he said. My father had never begged me for anything. I closed my fingers around the key. Let your CEO daughter handle it. Then I ended the call. An hour later, Rebecca called. I want to be clear, she said. We didn't walk because you resigned. We walked because they hid the leadership change and then failed the review. I understand. We still want the project. I sat up, but not under the structure they presented. She continued. Would you consider leading it independently? For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. Rebecca wanted me to build the rollout, select a qualified production partner, and report directly to her team. I would control the schedule, supplier standards, and risk plan. No family titles. No promises whispered over dinner. Everything in writing. I need time to review it, I said. Take until tomorrow, that evening. Claire asked to meet at a coffee shop downtown. She arrived without makeup, her hair pulled back, a legal pad clutched against her chest. Dad said you refused? I did. Her mouth tightened. You're punishing everyone. No, I stopped protecting you from the job you accepted. She looked down. I didn't know they were going to announce it that way. But you knew you owned 100%. Yes, you knew they planned to tell me after the deal closed. Silence. That answer hurt more than anything she could have said. Claire finally whispered, I thought you'd stay. Of course you did. Her eyes filled. What do you want? Want nothing from you. That frightened her more than anger would have. The next morning, I accepted Rebecca's offer. By noon, Dad was waiting outside the client's building in the rain. He stepped in front of me before I reached my car. If you take this project, you're stealing our client. I stopped. Clients aren't property. They choose who they trust. This company is your family's legacy. No, it's Claire's company. You made that very clear. He offered me a bonus, then a title, then a promise that he would talk to Claire about equity later. I almost laughed. You're still offering me words. His face hardened. So that's it. You're walking away from everything I built. I looked through the glass doors at Rebecca's team waiting upstairs. No, Dad, I'm walking towards something I built. Then I placed the brass key in his hand. He closed his fingers around it too late, for the first time. I didn't need the door it opened. By sunset, Rebecca's attorneys had sent the consulting agreement. My name appeared where Claire's had been placed without permission. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I saw one condition buried near the end. I had 72 hours to choose a production partner, and my family's factory was still the only one ready. The condition kept me awake until after midnight. Rebecca needed a production partner in 72 hours. My family's factory already had the equipment, permits, and trained staff. Every other option would delay the rollout by months. I could walk away and protect myself. Or I could build a structure that protected everyone who had never signed those papers. The next morning, I called Rebecca. I'll use the factory, I said, but only as a subcontractor. Then I listed my conditions. The client would pay through an independent account. Quality audits would happen without notice. Claire could not change production schedules without written approval. No employee could be fired for cooperating with my team. My name could not be used in advertising without permission. If the factory missed 2 major benchmarks, I could replace it. Rebecca agreed. Claire did not. She called me before lunch. You want to turn my company into your vendor? No, I said. You already turned it into a vendor when you lost the client. She went quiet. This keeps the line running. I continued. It protects the workers. It gives you revenue. But you don't get control of a project you couldn't manage. Dad took the phone from her. You're humiliating us. I'm giving you a contract. He had no answer for that. 3 days later, we met in a neutral conference room. Claire sat at one end of the table as owner and CEO. I sat across from her as the client's operations lead. For the first time in our lives, she could not borrow my authority and call it hers. She signed. The first month was rough. Claire tried to move a production run for a publicity event. I rejected it. Dad walked onto the floor and gave a supervisor different instructions. I documented it and removed his access to project meetings. Mom called to say I was being cold. I'm being clear, I told her. You all confused those two things for years. The employees noticed the difference first. Overtime required approval. Schedules stopped changing overnight. People knew who made each decision and why. Nora joined my consulting team after completing her notice period, and together we built a reporting system simple enough that nobody could hide behind confusion again. Claire changed more slowly. At first, she treated every correction like an insult. Then, one afternoon, after a packaging delay, she came into my office carrying the wrong forecast. I don't understand this, she admitted. It was the first honest sentence I had heard from her in months. So I showed her. Not because she deserved rescuing, because leadership should be taught when someone is finally willing to learn. By the end of the pilot phase, every shipment had arrived on time. Rebecca restored the full $9 million agreement. The factory survived, but the old family order did not. Dad stopped appearing without notice. Mom apologized for signing away my future because she thought I was strong enough to recover. I told her strength was not permission to hurt me. Claire kept 100% of the company, just as they wanted. She also kept 100% of the responsibility. As for me, I opened a small operations firm with Rebecca as my first major client. On moving day, Nora handed me a new silver key. I placed the old brass one inside a desk drawer. That key had once made me feel chosen. The new one opened a door that was actually mine. I used to think loyalty meant staying. No matter what it cost me, I was wrong. Loyalty without respect is another name for being used. My family gave Claire 100% of the company. In the end, she inherited 100% of the consequences. I did not destroy their business. I simply stopped disappearing inside it. Sometimes revenge is not taking back what was stolen. Sometimes it is building something no one can take from you. Have you ever stopped rescuing someone before they understood your worth? Share your story below and subscribe for the next family drama.